Okay, good morning, grade 11s. I will be talking about the next topic, which is topic 9, stress management, stress and crisis management. And we'll be looking at the description of stress, what is stress, and ways to manage stress, and at the same time, what is the importance of stress management in a pressurized work environment. So what is stress? Stress is the body's way of responding to a change. And I can actually take it on the other side and say, stress, and I want you to put it down, stress is the wear and tear the body experience. Stress is the wear and tear the body experience due to a change in environment. So stress is the body's way of responding to a change that requires a physical, a mental, or an emotional adjustment or a response. So when you're talking about a stress, like I always say, everybody experiences stress. There's no one that will say, okay, I'm not stressing, I've never experienced stress, there's no way I can experience the stress. And even looking at the lockdown, which we find ourselves in here, it's putting a lot of stress on everyone. Because you can imagine being on lockdown for 21 days, being restricted from moving, despite the fact that you are not an introvert, to say, okay, I don't like going out. Even if you don't like going out, not like you being locked down for 21 days. So stress is inevitable. Let me use that word. You cannot run away from stress. Everybody experiences stress in as much it brings there is a change in your body. When you lose a loved one, you experience a stress because there's going to be a change. When you change your job, maybe you used to drive 30 minutes to your previous workplace, and later on you find a new job, you have to drive 2 hours. Your body is going to experience a stress because there is a change, be it physically and mentally or emotional adjustment to your body. But what are the ways of experiencing of managing stress? Remember, I always lay emphasis: smoking and drinking do not help you to manage the stress, because when you finish drinking or you finish smoking, your stress still remains the same. So drinking and smoking is just a temporary way of saying, okay, I'm drunk, now I'm sleeping, I'm forgetting my problem. Excuse me, you are not forgetting your problem still remains the same. So what are the ways of managing stress? Number one, you need a regular exercise and a sufficient sleep. You need to exercise regularly and you need to have enough sleep. You know, the recommended hours by the doctor, they tell us we need to sleep for at least 9 hours, between 8 to 9 hours, which is good. But in a situation whereby you always sleep at 12 and you need to wake up at 4, or you need to wake up at 5 because you need to be in school, or sometimes you sleep at 1 and you need to wake up at 4, you need to be in school, or you need to be in your taxi, but by 5, that is not an example of a sufficient sleep. And at the same time, let me try and relate it to learners. Learners do experience stress during the time of examination because you are being forced to read, because you are not so used to reading when you get home. But because you have an examination, you will be forced to read. And the moment you force yourself to stay alive, to stay awake, to read, your body experiences a change. And at the same time, you need to adjust to all those kind of changes. And that is why we always say during your examination, make sure you have a sufficient sleep. And number two, second way of managing the stress is you need to plan ahead of time. You need to put things in place. You need to plan. This is what I'm doing today. This is what I'm doing tomorrow, so that you don't get frustrated when everything comes together at the same time. Like, okay, now the due date is today. You've got different kind of subjects. You've got business, you've got accounting, you've got life science. You know your due date, but you refuse to do your task. And in a situation whereby one is due today, the other is due tomorrow, then you get frustrated, and that is when you start panicking, and that is when you start stressing. So one way of managing the stress is to make sure you plan ahead of time. Number 3 is do not procrastinate. Procrastination is the steal of time. So procrastination means I'm doing it tomorrow, I'll bring it tomorrow, means I'll do it tomorrow. Why can't you sit down and do it once and for all? Then you know that is out of your way. So when you procrastinate, it makes you stressed. So for you not to be stressed, you need not to procrastinate. Number 4, you need to prioritize what must be done first each day. That is very, very important. You need to prioritize. Prioritizing means what comes first, what is more important. Those things that are more important needs to be done on time so that you know that is done and I can move on to the next phase, and you know that is more important. And lastly, way of managing the stress, you need to accept that change is inevitable. There's nothing you can do about that. Everybody experiences stress, so which means that change, you need to accept it. That is what it means. Be it you lose a loved one, it can be a dad, it can be a mom, you're stressing, but the point is, whoever is dead can never become alive anymore. So you need to accept that change. Or in a situation whereby you find yourself in a messy situation that is there, that there's nothing you can do about it, you need to accept it and move over that. And that is the only time you can manage stress. So let's now look at the importance of stress management in a pressurized work environment. Guys, there's one thing you need to understand. A workplace is a dramatic place. A workplace is full of pressure. A workplace is full of I just don't know. A workplace is just a chaotic environment. Let me use that word. A workplace is where your boss tells you, I need that done by today. But remember, you also have some problems you're dealing with at home. We've got parents going through divorces, but still need to be at work. We've got parents dealing with a lot of problems at home. They still need to be at work. We've got parents that are struggling with kids that do not listen. We've got parents that their kids are in maybe being in gangsterism. Some parents have kids in prison. They need to go to court. They need to go and visit them in Portsmouth. Parents experience a lot of things, but at the same time, they still need to be in the workplace because they need to put food on the table. And that is an example of a pressurized environment. So what can the management do to limit the stress, or to make sure that it's properly managed? So what is the importance of stress management? It needs to be managed in a proper way. Number 1, constant stress can cause many problems for a business since it becomes unhealthy environment. An environment that is so stressed up is an unhealthy environment. Too much stress becomes a barrier to success. Too much stress lowers the performance of workers. When employees are stressed, it lowers the performance of the workers. They do not concentrate on the work they're doing. They lose that motivation, and the morale actually goes down. Too much stress causes workers to become ill and stay absent from work. And remember, we have stress-related health issues. For example, we have diabetes can be an example of a stress-related issues. We can have hypertension as also an example of stress-related issues, and people can stay at home or stay absent because of that. Severely stressed worker will be very unproductive. A good manager will recognize the extent of stress within the workplace. It will take steps to decrease stress through good relationship. So, what do you think the business can do to actually make sure they're managing stress in the workplace? We do not have that in the core notes, but it's something we can actually talk about. What can the business do to make sure that the workplace is we can't say stress-free, because every day we will always experience stress, but it can be managed. It should be managed so that it doesn't affect the productivity of the business. The business can come up with team building activities. The business can bring in counselors to speak to people that are going through certain issues. And even the business can limit reduce the working time of the employees if need be, because the person is experiencing stress, is not being productive. So you can actually reduce the work time of the employees. And at the same time, the workplace should be an environment whereby employees are able to speak out, or even if they can confide in someone. It should be an environment whereby things can be shared, and from there help can be rendered to all those employees that are experiencing stress. And we have crisis on the other page. Stress crisis. Crisis can be defined as a time of great difficulty or a danger. So can we say South African economy is in crisis? Crisis is defined as a time of great difficulty or a danger, or we can say crisis is an unforeseen circumstances. It is an unforeseen circumstances. Like, for example, we have COVID. COVID has an impact on every business sectors everywhere in the world. It's an unforeseen circumstances. We weren't told that we're going to stay at home at the beginning of the year. Like, we never saw it in a new year, new resolution that, okay, you will be staying at home for the next 21 days. So crisis is an unforeseen circumstances, and every business will experience a crisis, but it's very important for businesses to have a plan B, that what if something happens, what can we do to manage that crisis? And that should be the responsibility of a risk manager in the business, to plan for unforeseen circumstances. And what are the steps for designing and implementing a crisis management plan? That needs to be in the business. A crisis management plan means, what if something happens, what can we do? Do we have sufficient funds? Do we have savings we can fall back on? It's very, very important. Number one, the business needs to define the possible kind of crisis that they might experience. We will be looking at different types of business-related crisis. So what kind of possible crisis can the business experience? You need to make a list of that. Number two, you need to investigate all possible effects it can have on your business. So if you are mentioning an economic crisis that can affect any business, you also need to look at what impact it's going to have on the business. Number three, you need to organize a team to design a workable, detailed plan. You need to assign certain people in certain area of the workplace to sit and come up with, what can we do in a situation whereby we experience this kind of crisis? Is there a plan B? What can you do? And number four, clearly communicates the plan to every member of the business. And lastly, test and practice the plan, which is very, very important. An example of this would be the emergency plan learners are being put through in the workplace, like in a fire exit plan, like in a situation whereby there's a fire in a school, a fire drill. Yeah, people needs to be trained, like, there is a school, let's take for example, there is a fire outbreak. How many exits do we have? How accessible are we to the doors, and what can we put in place, and so on and so forth. So every business needs to have a crisis plan in place. That is, they need to identify the kind of crisis they might find themselves in the nearest future. Anything can happen, Crisis is unaware, crisis is uninformed, crisis is not something you can predict. Anything can happen, but at the same time, you need to have a plan B. So let me give you a practical example. Some parents that have good savings are going to beat this kind of socioeconomic problems we are experiencing now. And because, okay, they've got savings, they actually don't need to wait for salaries to buy food. They could buy food even before they are being paid, just to make sure that everything is being put in place. Those are the examples of crisis that any individual can experience. You driving a car, anything can happen to that car. It can be stolen. It can catch fire. What plan do you have in place? What if something happens to that car? That is why people take out insurance. That is an example of a crisis management plan. Okay, let me take out an insurance so that if anything happens to this car, I'll be able to get a new one, or it can be fixed, or it can be replaced. and so on and so forth. So that crisis management plan is very important for all business and at the same time for every individual. So let's now look at ways by which business can deal with some business-related crisis. Let's look at the examples of business-related crisis. Number one, we have a tight deadlines. Tight deadlines means that you're trying to meet up a required time in terms of your production, in terms of your supply, and what do you need to do? Number one, you do not panic. When you find yourself in any form of crisis in the business, the first thing you need to take out is panicking. Number two, prioritize by making sure that you identify what is really important. Prioritizing means you need to think about what comes first. What do I need to do first? What is more important? Number three, break the old tasks down into smaller deadlines. So the moment you've identified what comes first, you need to break it down into smaller pieces, and at the same time, you need to assign different people to carry out that task, different tasks to meet up your deadline. You cannot do it all by yourself. The moment you think of, oh, how am I going to do it? That is when you start panicking. You need to assign. You need to give certain people in the workplace, you need to do that bit, do the bit, then everything can come together. If the deadline is impossible to meet, negotiate a later deadline. So if you cannot meet the deadline, it's better you negotiate for a new date instead of forcing yourself to meet the deadline. Remember, when you force yourself to meet the deadline, sometimes you might not do it right. Number two type of business-related crisis is loss of property. When you're talking of loss of property, it can be in any form. It can be due to fire. It can be due to break-ins, like stealing your computers. It can be anything. You can lose property in any different form. Number one, you need to secure computer with cables. And number two, you need to back up data on computers every day. So to avoid loss of information, because when you're talking of information, it can be part of the property of the business. You need to have a secured computer. A computer that cannot be, how can I say it, like invaded with viruses, and you need to back up your information. You need to duplicate your information. You cannot rely on one source. Make sure you have copies of informations in a secured place, in a different computer. Number three, provide employees with access codes to the premises. You shouldn't be the only one that have access to the premises. You need to provide people with what? Access code to the premises. Provide employees with a secured place to put their valuables, which is very, very important. And encourage employees to take responsibility for the safety of their own valuables and take so that you won't be the one to start paying for loss of property and loss of goods. Take disciplinary action against employees guilty of theft at work. That is very, very important. The moment you're found guilty of theft in the workplace, you will be dismissed. And number three, we have illness of employees. That is another business-related crisis. Ensure that an absence from work policy is in place. What kind of policy do you have in place to monitor illness of employees? And at the same time, when you're talking of illness of employees, some employees will always be sick on Fridays, and they will be sick on Mondays. What policy do you have in place? For example, example of the policy you must have in place is that, okay, when you're sick for more than 2 days, 3 days, you need to come up with a doctor. The third day, you need to come with a doctor's certificate. So you can be sick for 2 days, but if it extends to the third day, you need to come up with a doctor's certificate, except if your employees visit a Sangoma. I'm not sure if Sangomas give a doctor's certificate now, but they need to be something in place to monitor the absence of employees due to illness. Number two, record sick leave days taken by employees. Remember, sick leave as regards to the Basic Condition of Employment Act, sick leave is just 12 days in a year. Yeah. and the employees must not exceed that. The moment an employee exceeds that, then they get unpaid sick leave. So you need to keep a track record so that employees don't take things for granted and do things in their own way. And because it can cause a lot of crisis, because when employees are not in their station to carry out their job, it can put the business into jeopardy. And we have disciplinary procedures in place for workers taking leave without permission. Some workers are always absent, but they do not take permission. They need to be dealt with via the disciplinary procedures. Look for trends like employees taking off on Mondays and Fridays. So when employees, they start drinking on Thursday, Friday, they tell you they're sick, and on Monday, they are what? They're always, look for that trend, because obviously you can see that employees is a kind of a babblast. So look for the trend, and it has to be put in record. And lastly, we have address these trends immediately with the relevant employee. So the moment you can see the trend, then that employee needs to be called into the office, and that needs to be addressed. And because remember, when we can actually refer to it as incapacity, not being able to carry out your job, and you can lose your job due to all those kind of issues. And that takes us to the end of crisis management in the workplace and the kind of workplace related crisis. And lastly, for today, I will be talking about change management. I'll start change management today, and I will round up change management tomorrow. But let me just start with the change management. I will do the introduction, and I will speak about the theories tomorrow. What is change management? Change management is the application of a structured process and set of tools for leading the people's side of change to achieve a desired outcome. Change is good. Change is inevitable. Change can be uncomfortable because you are so used to certain ways of doing things. But at the same time, for businesses to be successful, they need to engage in a change. They cannot do things same way, same old fashioned. Things need to be moved around in the workplace. So when you're talking about change, we as human beings, we do not like change. Change management emphasizes the people's side of change. When you're talking about change management, it focuses more on people. It focuses more on human beings. We do not like change. And we prefer to just sit down and, no, I'm so comfortable in my zone. I don't feel like moving, but people need to move in the workplace. People's side of change and targets leadership within all levels of organization, including executives, senior leaders, middle managers, and line supervisors. When change management is done well, people feel engaged in the change process. Let me quickly speak about change management that is being done so well. In a work environment where change needs to be implemented, one thing the management needs to focus on is to take employees along with the change. You cannot implement a change without the consent of the employees. Then it becomes a problem. Because we are, as human beings, we resist change. We are so comfortable, we in our comfort zone. So for change to be successfully implemented in the workplace, employees need to be carried along. Employees need to be informed before you implement a change. Taking, for example, if we go back to school and the school announces that, okay, learners, on Monday we go back to school, and the principal says, learners, in the morning, oh, you're not going home at 2 or 3, you're going home at 4:30. What is going to be the reaction of everyone? No, but I wasn't told, I wasn't informed, I've got things to do, I don't have food, I don't have transport money, my taxi is here, and so on and so forth. People resist change, mostly because they've not been informed. But in a situation whereby the principal had already told you on Friday that learners, speak to your parents, make arrangements, on Monday we'll be leaving school at 4:30. People will like, okay. So on Monday, even if the principal reminds you or tells you, you will like, okay, I've already come up with a plan, it's fine. So It's very, very important to make people feel, to let them be involved, to engage them in the change process and work collectively towards. Working collectively means that the management and the employees needs to work together towards a common objective and realizing the benefit and delivering the result. So when you involve people, you in that instance, you're actually giving them the reasons why change is needed. You making them realize that if we do it this way, this is going to be the outcome. Okay, employees can think and sleep over it and okay, I've thought it, I think it makes sense. And at the same time, that is having a common objective. Why do we need a change? You need to let people know. People need to digest that. People need to think about it. And at the same time, management needs to let them know what is going to be the benefit of that change. And at the same time, what could be the result of implementing a change in the workplace. So change is good, but at the same time, it's inevitable. It can cause stress, like we said, but it's very important that the management takes the employees along when change needs to be implemented in the workplace. Don't just tell them about the change. It's going to be chaotic. Employees can go on strike because they are not being informed. They're not being, you get what I'm trying to say. Okay, let's take a look at the lockdown. The lockdown wasn't done like, okay, the president is speaking and there's going to be a lockdown tonight. But there was a grace of like 3-4 days to do your shopping, to do your run around before the lockdown. Because lockdown is an example of a change we are experiencing now. But before it is being implemented, we were being told. So we've already thought about that and like, oh, emotionally, physically, we've like, oh, Jay, what do I need to put in place, and so on and so forth. And on the day of the lockdown, we were like, okay, fine, I've already known, yeah, it's lockdown, and there's nothing I can do. So employees need to be informed. You need to take them along so that change can be properly implemented and the objective can be achieved at the end of the day. And that rounds up today's lesson. We will be taking theories of change management tomorrow, God's willing. And please make sure you watch the video, make notes, send me questions. Good afternoon.